The emergency beacon screamed across 17 star systems at once. Every communications array from the outer rim to the galactic core received the same desperate transmission. The message burned through subspace channels with such intensity that several monitoring stations overloaded their equipment trying to decode it on Centralis Station, the massive hub that served as the Galactic Federation's heart. Thousands of beings from dozens of species gathered in the Great Assembly Hall. The air shimmered with different atmospheric mixtures as environmental fields kept each delegation alive. Floating crystalline entities hovered near the ceiling while aquatic representatives remained in their mobile water tanks. The usual political chatter had died completely. Admiral Reese studied the holographic display showing the transmission's origin point. The Helix Nebula lay at the galaxy's edge, a region most species avoided due to its dangerous energy storms. An unstable space. Nothing should have been able to broadcast from there with such power. Yet the signal continued to pulse, growing stronger with each repetition. The translation systems finally cracked the alien language, and the decoded message appeared in the air above the assembly. The words sent a chill through every being present. "We are the Luminar. We have existed since before your stars were born. We who shaped reality itself now face extinction. The Devourers come. They consume all. 17 systems have fallen? We cannot stop them. Help us." Shocked silence filled the hall. The Luminar had never asked for help from anyone. These beings of pure energy lived in floating cities between the stars, manipulating matter and space with their thoughts alone. They had watched civilizations rise and fall for millions of years, never interfering, never needing assistance. Their very existence proved that evolution could transcend physical limitations. Representative Cole of the Hegemony Collective was the first to speak. His insectoid form clicked nervously as he addressed the assembly. "The Luminar speak of Devourers. Our deep space sensors detect massive energy disturbances in the affected systems. Whatever these entities are, they leave nothing behind. Not planets, not stars, not even empty space. Just voids where reality once existed." The Trade Consortium spokesperson, a blob-like creature that communicated through color changes, pulsed deep red. "Our merchant fleets report complete communication blackouts from those regions. Ships that enter never return. We're sealing all trade routes to the Helix Nebula immediately." A low rumble came from the Stellar Republic's delegation. "Their representative?" A being of living stone spoke in a voice like grinding mountains. "If the Luminar cannot defend themselves, what hope do the rest of us have? These Devourers clearly possess power beyond our understanding." Admiral Reese watched the debate with growing frustration. Fear spread through the assembly like a disease. Species after species declared their intention to fortify their borders and wait. The Confederation of Worlds spoke of retreating to their deepest core systems. The Empire of Suns announced they would hide their fleets in pocket dimensions until the threat passed. The transmission from the Helix Nebula pulsed again, stronger and more desperate. The Luminar were dying, and the galaxy's greatest powers were preparing to abandon them. Reese had seen cowardice before, but never on such a scale. These species had built their civilizations on the assumption that someone more powerful would always protect them. Now they discovered that even the mighty could fall. A new voice cut through the fearful chatter. "Earth will respond to the distress call." The assembly turned toward the human delegation. Ambassador Walsh stood calmly beside the holographic display, his simple uniform contrasting sharply with the elaborate environmental suits and exotic forms around him. Humans were still newcomers to galactic politics, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 2 centuries ago. Most species barely tolerated their presence in the Federation. Representative Cole's mandibles clicked in disbelief. "Humans cannot be serious. Your species lacks the technology to face such threats. You still use chemical rockets for basic transportation. Your weapons are crude kinetic projectiles. You would be slaughtered." Walsh's expression remained steady. "Perhaps, but the Luminar asked for help, and we're the only ones offering it. While you debate politics, they're dying." "The trade consortiums?" Representative flashed angry orange. "This is madness. Humans have no psychic abilities, no energy manipulation powers, no dimensional technology. They're primitives with nuclear weapons. Exactly, Walsh replied. Which means we might be the only species crazy enough to try? Admiral Reese felt something stir in his chest that had been absent from the assembly until now. Hope. The humans were right. Every advanced species in the galaxy had evolved beyond physical warfare, developing mental powers and energy-based technologies. They fought with thoughts and manipulated reality with their minds. But what if that very advancement made them vulnerable to these devourers? The Stellar Republic's representative spoke again. Even if humans could somehow damage these entities, they lack the numbers. Earth has perhaps 1,000 combat vessels. The Luminar commanded fleets of millions before their fall. Walsh nodded acknowledgement. We'll make do with what we have. The Unified Defense Command is already mobilizing our forces. Within 12 hours, every available human warship will be heading for the Helix Nebula. The assembly erupted in protests and warnings. Species that had barely acknowledged humanity's existence suddenly seemed very concerned about human survival. Some called it noble suicide. Others wondered if humans had hidden motives. A few suggested that Earth's response might anger the devourers and draw their attention to the core systems. Admiral Reese silenced the debate with a gesture. The Federation will provide humanitarian support to any species willing to answer the Luminar's call. Fuel, supplies, and medical assistance will be available at border stations. As the assembly dissolved into smaller groups arguing contingency plans and defensive strategies, Walsh approached the Admiral privately. You think we're insane, too? Reese considered the question carefully. I think you're the only species that might actually have a chance. Advanced civilizations become set in their ways. We develop powerful technologies and assume they're the solution to every problem, but sometimes the old ways work better than the new ones. The human ambassador smiled grimly. Let's hope you're right, because if we're wrong, the galaxy just lost its last hope along with its most expendable species. Outside the station's viewports, stars continued their ancient dance, unaware that darkness was spreading between them. The Devourers consumed system after system while the galaxy's greatest powers prepared to hide. Only humanity moved forward into the unknown, carrying weapons their enemies might not expect and a determination that transcended common sense. Every shipyard orbiting Earth hummed with desperate activity. Welders worked around the clock, their torches painting brilliant arcs across half-finished hulls. The Unified Defense Command had issued the most ambitious mobilization order in human history. Every combat vessel, from massive dreadnoughts to single-pilot fighters, received the same directive: prepare for immediate departure to the Helix Nebula. Captain Brooks walked through the hangar bay of the battlecruiser Defiance, watching technicians load the final supply containers. His ship had been scheduled for routine maintenance, but those plans disappeared when the Luminar's distress call reached Earth. Now his crew prepared for a mission that would take them further from home than any human had ever traveled. The tactical briefings had been sobering. The Devourers had consumed 17 star systems in 6 months, leaving behind regions of space where instruments detected nothing at all. Not empty vacuum, but actual nothingness where reality itself had been erased. The Luminar, beings who could manipulate matter at the molecular level and bend space with their thoughts, were retreating on all fronts. Lieutenant Hayes jogged up to Brooks, her tablet displaying the latest intelligence reports. Final count is in, sir. We have 312 vessels ready for departure. The Australis brings our heaviest guns, and the Meridian has our best sensor suite. Combined fleet carries enough firepower to glass a continent. Brooks nodded, though both officers knew their weapons had been designed to fight other humans, not cosmic horrors that consumed reality. Nuclear missiles and railguns seemed pathetically inadequate against enemies that had defeated energy beings older than Earth's sun. But inadequate weapons were better than no response at all. The departure ceremony was brief. President Chun addressed the fleet from Earth's orbital command center, her words broadcast to every ship simultaneously. You carry humanity's hopes into the unknown. The galaxy watches to see what our species will do when others turn away. Show them that humans never abandon those in need. The first jump took the fleet to the edge of human space, where they refueled at mining stations that had volunteered their entire supply reserves. Civilian crews waved from observation decks as the warships passed, their usual complaints about military spending forgotten in the face of interstellar crisis. Children held up handmade signs wishing the fleet luck, though none truly understood where their defenders were going. During the second jump sequence, long-range sensors detected an approaching vessel unlike anything in human databases. The ship appeared to be made of crystalline structures that shifted and flowed like liquid, its hull glowing with internal light. It matched course with the human fleet, transmitting no signals but clearly trying to make contact. Brooks ordered the fleet to halt while the unknown vessel approached. The alien ship was beautiful in an unsettling way, its surfaces reflecting starlight in patterns that hurt to look at directly. When it finally stopped relative to the Defiance, a voice spoke directly into every human mind aboard the fleet. The psychic contact felt like ice water flowing through their thoughts. Most crew members staggered under the mental intrusion, but the alien presence quickly adjusted its communication method to cause less discomfort. I am Ambassador Vel of the Luminor. You came. We did not believe any would answer our call. Brooks found himself speaking aloud to empty air, somehow knowing the alien would hear him. We received your distress signal. The Galactic Federation authorized us to provide assistance. Pain radiated through the psychic link, and several humans grabbed their heads as Vel's emotions leaked through. The Federation fears us because we are dying. Fear is logical. The Devourers cannot be fought with weapons of matter or energy. They exist in the spaces between thoughts, consuming the very concepts that give reality meaning. Hayes pulled up tactical displays showing the enemy's advance pattern. How do they move? Our sensors can't track them properly. They do not move, Vel replied, the alien's mental voice carrying undertones of despair. They simply stop being in one place and begin being in another. Distance has no meaning to them. Time flows differently in their presence. They are the end of existence made manifest. The briefing continued for hours, with Vel sharing intelligence that chilled every human who heard it. The Devourers fed on consciousness itself, growing stronger with each mind they consumed. They could phase through normal matter but seemed drawn to beings with psychic abilities. The Luminar's own mental powers had served as beacons, guiding the destroyers to inhabited systems. Your species puzzles us, Vel admitted as the exchange wound down. Humans possess no significant psychic presence. Your minds are quiet in ways we had not encountered before. This may be why the Devourers have not yet turned toward your space. Brooks saw the strategic implications immediately. You're saying we're invisible to them because we're not telepathic. Perhaps you are simply beneath their notice. Few Luminar understand how consciousness can exist without direct manipulation of reality. Your thoughts remain trapped within physical brains instead of flowing freely through space. The insult stung, but Brooks recognized the tactical advantage it implied. If the Devourers hunted by detecting psychic energy, then humanity's complete. Lack of mental powers might let them approach undetected. It was the first hopeful development since leaving Earth. Vel's ship began to withdraw, its crystalline hull brightening as it prepared to jump back toward the battle zone. We go to prepare our people for your arrival. Many Luminar have never seen beings who cannot touch their minds. They may react poorly to your presence. We'll manage, Brooks replied. How much time do we have before the main force arrives? The psychic contact flickered with uncertainty. Time has little meaning where the Devourers gather. Our calculations suggest the prime void will emerge from dark space within your concept of days or weeks. When it arrives, no force in this galaxy will be able to stand against it. As Vel's vessel disappeared into hyperspace, Brooks studied the tactical data they had shared. The Devourers' advance pattern showed clear intelligence and strategy. They weren't mindless destroyers but calculating predators that seemed to understand their enemies' capabilities. The fact that they had ignored human space so far suggested either indifference or deliberate planning. The fleet resumed its journey toward the Helix Nebula, each jump bringing them closer to a battle that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. Behind them, Earth's lights grew dimmer until they vanished entirely among the stars. Ahead lay the unknown, where ancient beings faced extinction and reality itself was under assault. Brooks walked the corridors of his ship, checking on crew members who were still recovering from their first psychic contact. The experience had shaken everyone, but human adaptability was already asserting itself. Engineers discussed modifications to their sensors that might detect the Devourers. Weapons specialists debated tactics for fighting enemies that could ignore conventional physics. In the medical bay, Dr. Lin treated crewmen suffering from psychic shock while studying the brain scans Vel's contact had produced. The neural patterns are fascinating, she explained to Brooks. When the alien spoke to us, our minds created new pathways trying to process the information. We're literally evolving in real time. The irony wasn't lost on Brooks. Humanity's crude physical evolution might prove more adaptable than the Luminar's transcendent mental development. Sometimes survival required regression rather than advancement. Sometimes the most primitive solution was the most effective one. As the fleet prepared for its final jump to the Helix Nebula, Brooks addressed his crew one last time. We're about to enter a war zone where our allies are beings of pure energy and our enemies consume reality itself. Our weapons are simple, our technology is basic, and our minds are closed to the universe around us. These limitations might be exactly what we need to win. The Helix Nebula stretched before them like a wound in space itself. What should have been a brilliant stellar nursery filled with newborn stars had become something far more disturbing. Entire sections of the nebula simply weren't there anymore, replaced by patches of absolute darkness that seemed to devour light itself. The human fleet's sensors registered these voids as areas where their instruments detected no energy. No matter, no space-time at all. Lieutenant Hayes stood at the tactical station aboard the Defiance, her face pale as she studied the readouts. The fleet had dropped out of hyperspace at the nebula's edge, expecting to find a war zone. Instead, they discovered something worse. The aftermath of battles where one side had been completely erased from existence. Multiple contacts bearing 2-7- Mark IV, Hayes reported, her voice tight with concentration. I'm reading what looks like a massive structure, but the sensor data keeps changing. It's like reality can't decide what's actually there. Captain Brooks moved to the observation deck, where the main viewport showed their destination. Sanctuary. The last major Luminar city ship hung in space like a dying ember. The structure defied human understanding of architecture. Its crystalline spires and flowing energy conduits creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. But even from this distance, damage was visible. Sections of the city flickered in and out of existence, and dark wounds scarred its glowing hull. The communications officer turned toward Brooks with confusion written across her features. Sir, I'm receiving multiple distress signals from the Luminar vessel, but they're not coming through our standard channels. The messages are appearing directly in our computer system somehow. Put them through the speakers, Brooks ordered, though he suspected the alien communications would bypass normal technology entirely. Vel's mental voice filled the bridge, weaker than before and tinged with desperation. Human fleet, you arrive at the moment of our greatest need. The Devourers mass for their final assault on Sanctuary. Our defenses fail, reality itself rebels against our presence. Through the viewport, space began to change. Darkness flowed between the stars like liquid shadow, forming shapes that existed in too many dimensions at once. The Devourers were arriving, and their very presence caused visual distortions that made navigation instruments spin wildly. Hayes struggled with her displays as readings fluctuated beyond all normal parameters. Contact bearing 005, range indeterminate. Whatever's out there, it's big enough to have its own gravity well, but our sensors can't get a solid lock. The energy signatures keep shifting through spectrums that shouldn't exist. The first Devourer emerged fully into normal space, and every Human who saw it understood why the Luminar were losing. The entity defied description, its form constantly shifting between solid matter and pure void. It moved without crossing the intervening distance, simply ceasing to exist in one location and manifesting in another. Where it passed, stars dimmed and died, their light consumed before it could travel more than a few meters. Sanctuary's defenders responded immediately. Streams of pure energy lanced out from the city ship's weapon arrays, beams that could have vaporized planets. The attacks passed harmlessly through the Devourer as if it weren't there, yet the creature somehow absorbed the energy and grew larger. Luminar fighters, their hulls glowing with psychic power, dove toward the shadow entity only to vanish completely upon contact. "All ships, prepare for combat," Brooks ordered, knowing how inadequate his weapons were against such an enemy. "Launch fighters and establish attack formation delta." The human response was immediate and overwhelming. Unlike the Luminar's elegant energy weapons, human armaments were crude and violent. Nuclear warheads detonated in brilliant flashes, railgun rounds streaked across space at significant fractions of light speed, and particle beams carved burning paths through the darkness. The first salvo struck the leading Devourer, and something unexpected happened. The entity recoiled, its form wavering as kinetic projectiles tore through its shadowy mass. Nuclear explosions created brief gaps in its structure, and for a moment the creature seemed genuinely hurt. "Direct hit?" Hayes reported with amazement. "The target is showing damage patterns. Whatever these things are, they're not immune to physical weapons." More Devourers emerged from the void between dimensions, their forms growing larger and more aggressive as they sensed resistance. But the human fleet pressed forward, pouring firepower into the alien entities with mechanical precision. Fighters weaved between the shadow creatures, their pilots relying on instruments instead of intuition to track enemies that barely existed in normal space. The battle intensified as both sides adapted to their opponents. The Devourers learned to phase partially out of reality when attacks approached, reducing the damage from human weapons. But they couldn't maintain their ethereal state while feeding, and human gunners quickly learned to target them during their vulnerable moments. Lieutenant Commander Torres led the fighter wing in a desperate charge against a massive Devourer that was approaching Sanctuary directly. His squadron fired everything they had, depleting their entire ammunition load in seconds. The creature staggered under the assault, its form breaking apart into smaller fragments that were quickly destroyed by supporting fire from the capital ships. "This is impossible," came Vel's voice through the psychic link, wonder replacing despair. "Your weapons harm them. In 4 million years of existence, we have never seen the Devourers take damage from any attack. But victory came at a terrible cost." The Devourers, enraged by actual resistance, began targeting human vessels with focused attention. Where their touch fell, reality simply stopped existing. The destroyer Phoenix vanished completely when a shadow entity flowed over its hull, leaving no wreckage or energy signature behind. The cruiser Vigilant lost its entire forward section to a localized reality collapse, the remaining hull sealing itself with emergency fields. Hayes coordinated damage reports from across the fleet, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We've lost 6 vessels completely and 8 more are reporting critical damage. But sir, we're actually winning. The Devourers are retreating from several engagement zones." The tide of battle shifted as human tactics proved effective against enemies that had never faced physical resistance before. The Devourers had evolved to counter psychic and energy-based attacks, but kinetic weapons and nuclear explosives operated on principles they couldn't absorb or redirect. Each human salvo carved away pieces of their shadowy forms, forcing them to retreat or face destruction. But even as the immediate battle turned in humanity's favor, long-range sensors detected a disturbing development. The local Devourer attacks had been probing actions, testing the defenses around Sanctuary. The real threat was still approaching from the depths of space. "New contact on extreme range sensors," Hayes announced, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Mass equivalent to a small moon bearing directly for our position. Estimated arrival time, 6 hours. Brooks felt ice form in his stomach as he realized what they were facing. The Prime Void? Through the psychic link, Vel's mental voice carried overtones of absolute terror. The source of all devourers approaches. When it arrives, it will unmake this entire system. Your weapons, effective as they are against the smaller entities, will be as insignificant as raindrops against a hurricane. The human fleet gathered around Sanctuary, their ammunition depleted and their hulls scarred by contact with forces that shouldn't exist. They had won the first battle through sheer audacity and technological incompatibility, but the war was far from over. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, something vast and hungry was coming to finish what the scout forces had begun. Brooks studied the tactical displays, calculating odds that grew worse with every projection. The fleet needed reinforcements, better weapons, and most importantly, time to understand their enemies. But time was the one resource they lacked. In 6 hours, the Prime Void would arrive, and humanity would learn whether their primitive weapons could damage something that had consumed entire dimensions. "Send a priority message to Earth," Brooks ordered. "Tell them we've engaged the enemy and achieved limited success. But warn them that what's coming next will make our current situation look like a training exercise." As the fleet prepared for the battle that would determine the fate of two ancient civilizations, space around them continued to flicker with the aftermath of reality-warping combat. The Devourers might be retreating, but they were far from defeated. And somewhere in the darkness, something impossibly vast was stirring to wakefulness, drawn by the taste of successful resistance. News of humanity's limited success against the Devourers spread through the galactic communication networks faster than light itself. Within hours of the first battle reports, species that had been preparing to hide in their deepest strongholds suddenly found reasons to reconsider their positions. The impossible had happened. Someone had actually hurt the entities that consumed reality. General Cross established a command center in the damaged lower sections of Sanctuary, where the Luminar's reality-warping architecture had been stabilized by human engineering techniques. The fusion of technologies created strange hybrids where crystalline corridors ended in metal bulkheads and energy conduits merged with fiber optic cables. It shouldn't have worked, but necessity had forced both species to adapt. Scholar Nim, one of the few Luminar military strategists to survive the initial assault, floated near the tactical displays in a form that shifted between solid matter and pure energy. Communication between the species required constant adjustment, as Nim's natural telepathy overwhelmed human minds while human verbal language felt crude and limiting to Luminar consciousness. The Confederation of Worlds has committed their entire drone fleet, Cross reported, studying the latest intelligence updates. 50,000 automated vessels, each one expendable and immune to the Devourer's psychic influence. They'll arrive in 18 hours. The irony wasn't lost on either commander. The Confederation had built their drone armies to fight other mechanical forces, never expecting their lack of consciousness to become a strategic advantage. Like humanity's crude weapons, the drones' artificial nature made them invisible to enemies that fed on living minds. Nim's mental voice carried undertones of amazement as they shared tactical data through their hybrid communication system. The Stellar Republic offers their manufacturing capacity. They will construct weapons based on your kinetic principles, but scaled to our energy requirements. The combination may prove more effective than either technology alone. The workshop, bays throughout Sanctuary, hummed with desperate innovation. Human engineers worked alongside Luminar artificers, creating weapons that merged the best of both approaches. Railguns that fired crystalline projectiles charged with reality anchoring. Fields, nuclear warheads wrapped in psychic dampeners that would prevent the Devourers from phasing out of normal space. Kinetic barriers powered by alien energy sources that could deflect attacks from higher dimensions. But even as the Alliance strengthened, intelligence reports painted an increasingly grim picture. The Prime Void had consumed 3 more star systems. During its approach, each one adding to its mass and power. Long-range sensors showed it had grown to planetary size, its gravitational influence warping space-time around it like a massive black hole. Yet unlike a black hole, It actively sought out and destroyed anything that possessed consciousness. Dr. Lin worked in the medical bay, studying brain scans from humans who had survived direct contact with devourer entities. The neural patterns showed disturbing changes, as if exposure to the shadow creatures was rewriting human consciousness at the fundamental level. Some crew members reported strange dreams where they existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Others claimed they could sense the approaching prime void like a growing headache that never subsided. The effect is cumulative, Lin explained to Cross during a brief respite between crises. Each exposure to the devourers changes us a little more. We're becoming something that can perceive their true nature, but I'm not sure our sanity can handle the transformation. The tactical situation grew more complex as additional species committed forces to the defense. The Empire of Suns, despite their public refusal to send military units, quietly transferred their most advanced manufacturing equipment to forward bases near the Helix Nebula. The Trade Consortium provided logistical support through shell companies, maintaining plausible deniability while ensuring the defenders had adequate supplies. Even species that remained officially neutral began contributing in subtle ways. The Hegemony Collective shared intelligence about dimensional physics. The Academic Union provided theoretical models for understanding how the devourers moved between realities. Each contribution added pieces to a puzzle that might finally explain what humanity was truly fighting. Cross stood before a holographic display showing the enemy's origin point, deep in the void between galaxies where normal matter couldn't exist. According to the Luminar records, the devourers first appeared in the Andromeda Galaxy approximately 2 million years ago. They consumed every inhabited system there before moving on to smaller satellite galaxies. Nim's energy form pulsed with controlled fear as they shared memories of ancient warnings. We received distress calls from Andromeda, but by the time our fastest ships arrived, nothing remained. Not planets, not stars, not even the space they had occupied. The entire galaxy had been reduced to a wound in reality that our instruments could not measure. The scope of the threat became clear as more intelligence flowed in from surviving civilizations across the local galactic group. The devourers weren't just conquerors, but cosmic parasites that moved from galaxy to galaxy, consuming everything that possessed consciousness before moving on to their next feeding ground. They had been working their way through the local cluster for millions of years, and the Milky Way was simply their latest target. They're not evil, Cross realized as he studied the pattern of destruction. They're just hungry. We're fighting the galactic equivalent of a swarm of locusts. But understanding the enemy's nature didn't make them easier to defeat. The Prime Void continued its approach, and even the combined fleet now gathering around Sanctuary would be vastly outnumbered. Worse, preliminary calculations suggested that destroying the massive entity might require weapons capable of destabilizing entire star systems. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Professor Walsh, a xenobiologist who had been studying devourer tissue samples, discovered that the entities existed simultaneously across multiple dimensions. They could phase out of normal spacetime, but doing so required maintaining connection points in each reality they inhabited. Severing those connections might force them back into a single dimension where conventional weapons could destroy them. It's like they're cosmic jellyfish, Walsh explained to the assembled command staff. They trail parts of themselves through dimensional barriers, feeding in multiple realities at once. But if we can cut those dimensional tentacles, they become vulnerable. The solution required unprecedented cooperation between species that had barely trusted each other before the crisis. Luminar psychic technology could detect the dimensional connection points. Human kinetic weapons could sever them. The Confederation's drones could coordinate the attacks across multiple realities simultaneously. It was insane, impossible, and their only hope for survival. As the Prime Void approached the outer edge of the Helix Nebula, reality began to distort around it. Stars dimmed as their light was consumed before it could travel more than a few light minutes. Space itself seemed to contract, pulling matter into the entity's event horizon where it was converted into pure nothingness. The few luminar observation posts that remained in the outer system transmitted increasingly frantic reports before falling silent one by one. 12 hours until contact, Cross announced to the combined fleet commanders. All vessels are to maintain maximum separation to prevent cascading failures if the dimensional weapons don't work as planned. The Allied forces gathered around Sanctuary represented the largest military cooperation in galactic history. Human dreadnoughts floated alongside luminar city ships. Confederation drone carriers deployed their mechanical swarms while stellar Republic factory ships continued producing weapons until the final moment. Even the normally secretive Empire of Suns had sent a single vessel, its crew maintaining complete silence while contributing advanced sensor data to the collective intelligence network. In the medical bay, Dr. Lin made a disturbing discovery while analyzing the latest brain scans from the human crew. General, you need to see this. The neural changes aren't random. They're following a specific pattern, almost like the Devourers are trying to communicate with us. Cross studied the scan results, noting the way certain brain regions had developed new neural pathways that seemed to resonate with dimensional frequencies. Are you saying they're trying to recruit us? I think they're trying to prepare us, Lin replied quietly. The changes make us more sensitive to dimensional shifts in psychic energy. If this continues, we might start developing abilities similar to the Luminar. The implications were staggering. Exposure to the Devourers wasn't just changing human consciousness. It was accelerating human evolution in directions that normally took millions of years. The species that prided itself on crude physical technology might be transforming into something far more advanced, whether they wanted to or not. As the final preparations for battle continued, Cross found himself wondering if victory would matter. Even if they defeated the Prime Void and drove off the remaining Devourers, humanity had been fundamentally changed by the encounter. They were no longer the simple physical beings who had left Earth to answer a distress call. They were becoming something new, something that existed partially in the same higher dimensions as their enemies. A countdown to final contact continued, and somewhere in the darkness between stars, the Prime Void stirred with anticipation. It had consumed countless species across multiple galaxies, but none had ever fought back effectively. The taste of resistance was new and intriguing. For the first time in its existence, the cosmic predator was genuinely curious about its prey. The Prime Void emerged from dark space like a malignant tumor bursting into reality. Its mass dwarfed most planets, a writhing sphere of absolute darkness that consumed light, matter, and the very concepts that gave meaning to existence. Where it passed, stars didn't just die. They were retroactively erased from history, leaving gaps in space where something should have been but never was. Admiral Stone coordinated the final battle from the flagship Retribution, a hastily retrofitted dreadnought bristling with hybrid weapons that merged human engineering with alien science. Around him, the greatest fleet in galactic history spread across the Theta sector, waiting for an enemy that defied every tactical manual ever written. The Confederation's drone swarms moved first, 50,000 mechanical minds attacking in perfect coordination. Their lack of consciousness made them invisible to the Prime Void's hunger, but their physical presence still registered on its alien senses. Tentacles of living shadow lashed out, not destroying the drones but unmaking them, removing them from the timeline so completely that their operators forgot they had ever existed. Wave 1 is gone, reported Lieutenant Hayes from the tactical station. Her voice steady despite the impossibility of what she was observing. I can't detect any wreckage or energy signatures. It's like they were never there. The Luminar city ships responded with concentrated psychic bombardment, their ancient minds focusing reality-warping energies into coherent weapons. But the Prime Void absorbed their attacks like a black hole consuming starlight, growing larger and more aggressive with each burst of mental energy it devoured. The entity's hunger was absolute, and the Luminar's own power source only fed its expansion. All human vessels initiate assault pattern Omega, Stone commanded, watching as his crude kinetic weapons prepared to face an enemy that had consumed galaxies. Target the dimensional anchor points and maintain continuous fire. The human fleet opened fire with everything they had. Nuclear warheads detonated in brilliant cascades across the prime void's surface, each explosion creating temporary wounds in its shadowy mass. Railgun salvos streaked through space at relativistic speeds, their momentum carrying them deep into the entity's core before the darkness could phase them out of existence. For the first time since emerging into normal space, the cosmic predator showed signs of actual damage. Captain Rivers piloted his fighter squadron through the chaos, weaving between tentacles of living void that reached out to unmake his existence. His pilots had volunteered for the most dangerous assignment in the battle, delivering prototype dimensional bombs directly into the prime void's core structure. The weapons were untested, cobbled together from human nuclear technology and luminar reality manipulation systems. They might collapse the dimensional rift that allowed the entity to exist in multiple realities simultaneously, or they might destabilize local space-time and destroy everything within several light years. "Bomb bay doors open," Rivers reported, as his fighter dove toward the prime void's surface. Around him, space twisted and writhed as the entity's presence warped the fundamental laws of physics. His instruments spun wildly, unable to process readings from higher dimensions that human science had never encountered. The defensive fire was unlike anything the human pilots had trained for. Instead of energy beams or projectiles, the prime void attacked with tendrils of concentrated nothingness that erased whatever they touched. Fighter after fighter simply vanished as the dark appendages swept through their formations. Leaving no trace that they had ever existed, Scholar Nim coordinated the psychic defense from Sanctuary. Their energy form stretched across multiple dimensional planes as they tried to shield human minds from the prime void's reality-distorting presence. The effort was destroying them slowly, their ancient consciousness fragmenting under the strain of protecting beings whose thoughts operated in completely different ways. "The entity learns," Nim reported through their failing psychic link. "It adapts to each attack pattern. Your kinetic weapons were effective initially, but it develops countermeasures. We must strike now before it fully understands your technology." General Cross watched the battle unfold from the command center, his enhanced vision allowing him to perceive dimensional shifts that would have been invisible to unmodified humans. The exposure to devour energy had changed him, making him something between human and luminar. He could feel the prime void's hunger as a physical sensation, a cosmic appetite that demanded the consumption of all consciousness. Second wave, execute dimensional severance protocol. Cross ordered, targeting the connection points that anchored the prime void to parallel realities. The hybrid weapons fired in perfect synchronization, their reality anchoring fields creating tiers in space-time that forced the entity to exist in only one dimension at a time. The effect was immediate and devastating. The prime void convulsed as parts of its mass were cut off from their dimensional supports, becoming vulnerable to conventional attack. Human gunners concentrated their fire on the severed sections, watching as nuclear explosions finally began to cause permanent damage to their cosmic enemy. But the entity's response was equally swift and terrible. Sensing genuine threat for the first time in millions of years, the prime void began to contract, pulling its scattered mass into a dense core that would be nearly impossible to destroy. The gravitational effects alone threatened to collapse the local star system into a black hole. Rivers pushed his fighter past its design limits, racing against time to deliver his dimensional bomb before the prime void could complete its transformation. His squadron was down to 3 surviving craft, their hulls scarred by contact with forces that existed outside normal physics. The bomb bay doors struggled to open as reality distorted around them, the mechanism unable to function properly in the warped space-time near the entity's core. "Dimensional bomb armed and ready," Rivers reported, his voice calm despite the impossible situation. "Beginning final approach." The prime void sensed the approaching threat and focused its attention on the tiny human fighter. Tentacles of absolute darkness reached out, moving faster than light itself as they sought to erase Rivers from existence. But the pilot had learned from watching his squadron mates die. He didn't try to dodge the attacks. Instead, he flew directly toward them, using the entity's own dimensional distortions to slip between realities. The bomb release was perfectly timed. As River's fighter phased through a reality-warping tendril, he dropped the dimensional weapon directly into the Prime Void's core structure. The device detonated immediately, its explosion existing simultaneously across multiple dimensions as it severed the entity's connection to parallel realities. The result was beyond spectacular. The Prime Void imploded as its mass collapsed into a single dimension, creating a cascade failure that rippled through local spacetime. The dimensional rift that had allowed Devourers to enter this reality began to seal itself, cutting off the remaining shadow entities from their home dimension. River's fighter was vaporized in the explosion, but his sacrifice had wounded something that had seemed invulnerable. The Prime Void's form destabilized, its solid darkness breaking apart into smaller fragments that could be destroyed by conventional weapons. Across the battlefield, human gunners concentrated their fire on the scattered pieces, watching as the cosmic predator finally began to die. Admiral Stone coordinated the final assault, directing every available weapon against the Prime Void's remaining core. Nuclear warheads detonated in sequence, each explosion reducing the entity's mass and power. Railgun salvos carved through its defenses, which could no longer phase out of normal spacetime. The battle that had seemed hopeless minutes before suddenly shifted decisively in favor of the Allied forces. The death of the Prime Void was as violent as its life had been. As its core finally collapsed, the entity released every bit of energy it had consumed across millions of years. Stars that had been devoured in distant galaxies blazed back into existence for brief moments before fading forever. The psychic scream of its destruction echoed across multiple dimensions, a sound that every conscious being in the galaxy heard regardless of their distance from the battle. In the aftermath, space around the Helix Nebula slowly returned to normal. The dimensional tiers sealed themselves, cutting off the remaining Devourers from their source of power. The surviving shadow entities, trapped in normal spacetime, were quickly hunted down and destroyed by the combined fleet. The victory came at enormous cost. Half the human fleet had been destroyed or damaged beyond repair. The Luminor had lost most of their remaining city ships, their civilization reduced to a handful of survivors. But they had succeeded in something that no other species had managed in millions of years. They had stopped the Devourers and saved the galaxy from consumption. Dr. Lin worked frantically in the medical bays, treating survivors whose minds had been fundamentally altered by exposure to higher dimensional forces. The neural changes were permanent and accelerating. Humans were evolving into something new, something that existed partially in the same reality layers as the entities they had defeated. "We're not the same species that left Earth," Lin reported to General Cross as they surveyed the transformed crew members. "The exposure to Devourer energy has triggered evolutionary changes that would normally take millions of years. We're becoming something between human and Luminar." Cross nodded, feeling the dimensional awareness flowing through his own enhanced consciousness. He could perceive realities that had been invisible before, sense the quantum fluctuations that underlying normal spacetime. It was simultaneously wonderful and terrifying. The galaxy's response to humanity's victory was immediate and dramatic. Species that had dismissed humans as primitive warmongers suddenly viewed them as the saviors of civilization. The Galactic Federation offered humanity full membership with unprecedented rights and privileges. Trade agreements flooded in from species eager to ally themselves with the beings who had defeated the unconquerable. But perhaps the most significant change was humanity's new role as the galaxy's protector. The Void Watch was established within months of the victory, a permanent military organization dedicated to monitoring dimensional threats and protecting civilized space from cosmic predators. Human fleets began patrolling the galaxy's edge, their enhanced crews serving as early warning systems against threats from higher dimensions. Ambassador Walsh stood before the Galactic Federation Assembly, addressing the same delegates who had called humanity primitive and expendable just months before. "We answered the Luminar's call because it was the right thing to do. We'll continue to defend this galaxy for the same reason. Not because we seek power or glory, but because someone has to stand guard against the darkness between the stars. The applause was thunderous and genuine. Humanity had earned its place among the stars, not through conquest or diplomacy, but through sacrifice and courage in the face of impossible odds. They had proven that sometimes the most dangerous species was exactly what the galaxy needed for survival. In the deepest vaults of Earth's orbital command centers, scientists studied samples of devourer tissue and dimensional resonance patterns, preparing for the day when new threats might emerge from the spaces between realities. The universe was vast and full of dangers that transcended normal understanding. But now it also contained a species willing to face those dangers no matter how terrible they might be. The galaxy had learned that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their weapons or their technology. It was their absolute refusal to abandon hope when faced with extinction. That determination had saved them all, and it would continue to stand guard against the infinite darkness that lay beyond the edge of known space.